You're a god, Joon-Seok, but no woman can survive your heaven. Those were the last words the seventh girl screamed before she vanished into the Seoul night. I am the man who owns the city, the man whose tattoos tell the story of 1,000 fallen enemies. But in the bedroom, I am a ghost, a freak, a man who needs control just to keep from falling apart. I thought I was destined for a throne of ice, until I saw her under the red lights of Los Angeles. Aaliyah. She didn't bow. She didn't tremble. She looked at my darkness and asked, "Is that all you've got?" Then I walked into that Los Angeles club, and she moved like chaos wrapped in silk. Aaliyah Stone. Golden skin under crimson lights, dancing a language I thought only I understood, the brutal poetry of dominance and surrender. Every other woman saw my protocol and ran. She saw it and smiled, not with pity, not with fear, with challenge. "Is that your best attempt to scare me away?" she whispered when I pulled her into the private room, when I told her exactly what being mine would cost. Her eyes, God, those eyes, held something I'd never seen before, recognition, like she'd been searching for a monster who needed exactly what she had to give. I thought I was hunting. I didn't realize I was the one being captured. Subscribe to Area More Stories. Hit that like button. Because we're building something different, a place where broken souls find each other in the dark, and we don't look away from what that truly means. The red lights of Club Velvet bled through smoke and bass, turning everything into a fever dream. I'd come to Los Angeles for business. A weapons deal with the Mexicans, territory negotiations with the Armenians. But the moment she stepped onto that stage, every calculation in my head went silent. Aaliyah. She didn't dance. She commanded. Every roll of her hips was a declaration of war, every arch of her spine a negotiation. The pole became her weapon, her throne, her pulpit. Men threw money at her feet like offerings to a goddess who would never look down. But I saw what they didn't. The way her eyes scanned the room with the cold assessment of a predator. The way her smile never quite reached those eyes. She wasn't performing sexuality. She was weaponizing it. I'd seen 1,000 beautiful women. I'd owned half of them in one way or another. But Aaliyah moved like she understood something fundamental about power that most people spent their whole lives missing. Submission and dominance aren't opposites. They're dance partners. My second in command, Minho, leaned close. "Boss, the Armenians are waiting. Tell them I'm busy." But I said I'm busy. I didn't take my eyes off her. The song built to its climax, and she descended the pole in one fluid motion that looked like falling and flying at the same time. When her feet touched the stage, she finally looked directly at me, held my gaze, didn't flinch. That's when I knew I was in trouble. The private room smelled like leather and expensive whiskey. I'd paid the manager enough to clear the entire back section, enough to make sure we wouldn't be interrupted. Aaliyah sat across from me, legs crossed, still in her stage outfit, but somehow looking more armored than vulnerable. "You're a long way from home, Mr. Park," she said, her voice smooth as silk over razor wire. The manager had given her my name. Good. So I've been told. What does a Korean businessman want with a girl from Compton? I smiled. She'd done her research too. I'm not a businessman. I know what you are. She tilted her head, studying me like I was a puzzle she was deciding whether to solve. The Untouchable. Head of the Baekdu syndicate. You've got blood on your hands that soap won't wash off, and a reputation for being the coldest bastard in Seoul. And yet you're still sitting here? I'm curious. She leaned forward, and I caught a hint of her perfume. Something dark and sweet, like poison fruit. Men like you don't fly to LA to watch strippers, so what do you really want? The truth lodged in my throat. I want someone who won't run when they see the real me. But I'd learned long ago that truth was a luxury I couldn't afford. I want to offer you a contract. Her eyebrow arched. I don't do private sessions. Not that kind of contract. I pulled the document from my jacket. 3 pages, drafted by my lawyers, translated into English. 1 month in Seoul. You'll live in my estate, attend certain functions with me. In exchange, I'll pay you $200,000, plus expenses. She didn't reach for the paper. What's the catch? There are rules. There always are. I met her eyes. This was the moment they always ran. I need structure, order, even in intimate situations, especially in those situations. I have a protocol for sex. Not a question. Her voice was flat, unreadable. For everything. The women I've been with before couldn't understand. They thought I was playing a game, or that it was some kind of kink. It's not. My jaw tightened. It's the only way I can function without falling apart, she finished quietly. The room seemed to contract around us. Yes. Aaliyah was silent for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her thigh. Then she picked up the contract and started reading. I watched her eyes move across the pages, watched for the moment of disgust or pity or fear. It never came. This is very detailed, she finally said. I don't believe in surprises. And if I break a rule? The contract terminates. You keep whatever you've earned up to that point. And if you break a rule? No one had ever asked me that before. Then you're free to leave, with the full amount. She set the contract down and looked at me, really looked at me, with an intensity that made my chest tight. Why me? Because when I watched you dance, I saw someone who understands that control isn't about power, it's about survival. Because every other woman saw my protocol as a prison, but you might see it as a language. Because I'm tired of being alone in a room full of people who will never know me. Because you won't run, I said instead. Aaliyah Stone smiled then, a real smile, sharp and dangerous and alive. She picked up the pen. 1 month, she said, signing her name in bold, decisive strokes. But fair warning, Mr. Park, I don't break easy. Neither do I, Miss Stone. I took the contract, her signature still wet. Neither do I. If you're hooked on Joon-Seok and Aaliyah's dangerous game, subscribe to Aria More Stories and hit that like button. Because what happens when she steps into his soul empire? When his syndicate sees a black woman on the Untouchable's arm? When she discovers the full depth of his protocol? Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. The real game is just beginning. Seoul greeted Aaliyah like a beautiful prison. The moment Joon-Seok's private jet touched down at Incheon, she felt the weight of 1,000 judging eyes she hadn't even met yet. The city glittered beneath them, neon and steel, ancient temples shadowed by skyscrapers. But all she could think about was the way his hand had tightened around hers during descent. Not possessive, afraid. The syndicate made their opinions clear within 48 hours. She wasn't introduced as his guest. She was paraded, assessed, whispered about in rapid Korean she wasn't supposed to understand, except she'd learned enough to catch Black Girl, American Whore, and the one that made her blood run cold. Temporary. Joon-Seok's penthouse became her cage. 30 floors above the city, surrounded by minimalist luxury and the kind of silence that screamed wealth, she watched him transform. The man who'd pulled her into that private room in LA, raw, honest, desperate, was disappearing behind layers of ice. The Untouchable was rebuilding his walls, and she was on the wrong side of them. You don't have to do this, she told him the night before the gala, watching him button a shirt that probably cost more than her rent. Pretend I don't exist. Pretend you don't need what you need. His fingers stilled. For a moment, she thought she saw him, the real him, flicker in his reflection. Then the mask sealed shut. You don't understand what's at stake here. Then make me understand. But he didn't. He just finished dressing and walked out, leaving her alone with the city lights and the growing certainty that she'd flown 8,000 miles to lose him anyway. The gala was a war zone disguised as elegance. The Grand Hyatt ballroom dripped with old money and older blood. Men in $10,000 suits discussed territory over champagne. Women draped in diamonds smiled with mouths that had ordered executions. And Aaliyah, in a black gown that clung to every curve Joon-Seok had mapped with reverent hands, became the night's favorite spectacle. She felt their stares like knives, not desire, assessment, calculation. The exotic American novelty their Untouchable had imported like expensive luggage. Joon-Seok kept her close but distant, his hand on her lower back, more bodyguard than lover. She watched him work the room with lethal charm, speaking 3 languages, bowing with perfect depth to the right people, his smile never reaching those predatory eyes. This was his domain, his kingdom, and she was the flaw in his armor. Kim Tae-hyun appeared like a viper in Armani, rival boss, Joon-Seok's equal in cruelty, inferior in control. His entourage laughed too loud, drank too freely, men who ruled through chaos rather than fear. Joon-Seok, ah! Tae-hyun called across the champagne fountain, his voice carrying just enough to turn heads. I see you've imported new entertainment. Tell me, does she understand what you really need? Or did you have to draw her a manual? The room didn't gasp. These people were too well trained for that. But the silence shifted, sharpened into anticipation. Blood in the water. Aaliyah felt Joon-Seok's hand turn to stone against her spine. Watched his jaw tighten microscopically. This was the moment. The shame he'd carried like a bullet lodged near his heart, finally weaponized by someone who knew exactly where to aim. She'd seen this before. In LA, when men tried to break dancers by exposing their vulnerabilities, when they thought cruelty was the same as power. Joon-Seok's mouth opened. She knew what was coming. The cold dismissal, the retreat into his untouchable persona, where nothing and no one could wound him because he'd already killed the parts of himself that could feel. So Aaliyah moved first. She stepped forward, out of his protective grip, and walked straight toward Tae-hyun. Every eye in the ballroom tracked her like a bullet's trajectory. She felt Joon-Seok's shock like electricity behind her, but she didn't look back. You're right, she said, her voice carrying that same dangerous honey that had stopped Joon-Seok cold in LA. He does have specific needs, exacting standards, a protocol most women couldn't handle. She let her smile turn predatory. Which is exactly why he needed someone strong enough to meet him there. She turned, letting the room see her face as she looked at Joon-Seok, not with submission, but with equal claiming. You think his control is a weakness? I think cowards mistake vulnerability for fragility. Any man can take what he wants through violence. It takes a king to ask for what he needs. The silence was absolute now. She closed the distance between them, her hand finding his jaw, forcing him to see her. Really see her. So yes, Kim Tae-hyun, she said, without breaking eye contact with Joon-Seok. I understand exactly what he needs. And unlike every other woman who ran, I'm not afraid of a man brave enough to have rules in a world without them. She kissed him then. Not for the room. For him. A promise that his darkness didn't scare her. It called to something equally fierce inside her soul. When she pulled back, Joon-Seok's eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not gratitude, not relief. Worship. Tae-hyun's laughter died somewhere in his throat. And the syndicate learned a truth that would reshape their hierarchy. The untouchable had finally been touched, and the woman who'd done it was more dangerous than any of them had calculated. The gunfire came at 3 a.m., shattering the Seoul penthouse windows like a promise finally kept. Joon-Seok moved before his mind could catch up, muscle memory forged in blood, every motion surgical. Pull Aaliyah down, calculate trajectories, return fire with the kind of precision that had earned him his reputation. 3 shots, 3 bodies in the courtyard below. The rival family had finally made their move, and like everything else in his life, he'd anticipated it perfectly. What he hadn't anticipated was the silence after. Not the absence of sound. The city still hummed, sirens wailing in the distance, his men shouting security codes through the shattered windows. No, it was the silence inside his own chest. That hollow space where the protocol usually lived, the rigid structure that told him exactly what to do next. Secure the perimeter. Eliminate witnesses, show no weakness, demand control. Instead, he was shaking. Joon-Seok! Aaliyah's voice cut through the chaos, steady as a heartbeat. She wasn't cowering in the corner where he'd pushed her. She was standing, glass in her hair, blood. His blood, he realized, streaking her forearm where a ricochet had grazed him. Look at me. He couldn't. Because looking at her meant seeing what he'd almost lost. What his life, this brutal, calculated existence, had nearly stolen from him. I said, look at me. Not a request, a command wrapped in compassion. When his eyes finally met hers, he expected to see fear, regret, the same horror that had driven 7 women before her to vanish into the night. Instead, he saw something that broke him more completely than any bullet ever could. Understanding. You saved us, she said simply, crossing the room through broken glass like she was walking through water. And now I'm going to save you. I don't... His voice cracked, the untouchable, fracturing. I don't know how to do this without the rules, Aaliyah. Without structure, I'm just... human. She reached for his face and he flinched, not from fear of her touch, but from fear of his own need for it. You think I don't see it? The way you need order to feel safe? Baby, I've been watching you try to control your way into feeling something real for weeks now. His men were clearing the building, emergency protocols activated, the machinery of his empire grinding forward while he stood frozen in the wreckage of his own making. 7 women had run from this, from the man who needed commands and compliance just to let himself be touched, who needed protocols to feel like he wasn't dissolving into chaos. But Aaliyah wasn't running. She was holding him. Not with her hands, those stayed steady at her sides, giving him space even as she closed the distance between them. She was holding him with her presence. Her refusal to look away from the parts of him he'd been taught were monstrous. The parts that needed structure in surrender, control in intimacy, rules to replace the ones the world had shattered in him long ago. What if, she whispered, her breath warm against his jaw, we wrote new rules together. Not your protocol, not my survival mechanisms. Ours. Something in his chest unlocked. A door he'd welded shut so long ago, he'd forgotten it was even there. I don't know how to be soft, he confessed, the words tasting like blood and truth. I don't know how to just let go. Then don't. She smiled, that dangerous, knowing smile that had captured him in Los Angeles. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to trust that what you are is enough. Your need for structure? I can hold that. Your darkness? I've got my own shadows, baby. They're already dancing together. In the distance, police sirens. His second-in-command calling for medical. The rival family's bodies being removed from his property. The whole violent machinery of his world spinning forward like it always did. But here, in this moment, Park Joon-Seok, the untouchable, the man who'd built an empire on fear and precision, finally surrendered. Not to chaos, not to softness he couldn't sustain. He surrendered to the truth that his scars and her strength fit together like pieces of a puzzle he'd been trying to force into the wrong shape his entire life. She didn't need him to be normal. She needed him to be honest. And he didn't need to control her to be safe with her. He needed to trust her. Okay, he breathed, the word feeling like a confession and a baptism all at once. Teach me our rules. She kissed him then, not soft, not gentle, but real. A kiss that tasted like gunpowder and promise, like survival and choice, like 2 people who decided that broken didn't mean beyond repair. The untouchable was finally home.